All right, so I'm going to be talking through how to upgrade Ember.js apps. How many people in here who have upgraded an Ember app once? More than once? Pretty much everybody who has an Ember app, it seems like. So the idea that the Ember.js community talks about a lot is this idea of stability without stagnation. It's kind of the community commitment. And this might remind you of the Facebook comment of move fast and break things. So the idea of stability without stagnation is that we're continuing to move the framework forward, but we're trying to keep some amount of stability so you're not constantly trying to pay attention to how to upgrade your application. I didn't end up getting the licensing approval to show you these furry, they look somewhat like Tom Dale type motifs. But anyway, so this is kind of the life cycle of the Ember project. So you've got Canary, Beta, Release, and LTS. And we'll talk through kind of each piece. So Canary is the master build. You are insane if you're using this for a production project. Every time something gets pushed into the master branch of Ember, whether it's it might be behind a feature flag, it might not be. This is like total craziness. You should use this if you're maybe building something fancy and brand new with a new Ember feature, but if you are using something in production, you should not be using this. Okay, so next is Beta. So this is about once a week-ish. So usually there are 6 betas in between every major release. So we release every 6 weeks. Beta about once a week. It's usually a good idea, especially if you're an add-on author or you're staying along with releases, to have a build running against beta so that you can help the community say, hey, I've actually got a problem with something that's coming out in this beta. You can kind of be the canary also in this case. Then there's the release, which is once every 6 weeks. So this is like 2.9, 2.10, 2.11. These are the major stable releases, which are once every 6 weeks. And then you've got your LTS, which is what we use at Ibotta. It's once every 4th release, or every 24 weeks, a long-term support version comes out. So the reason you might use this is that these will actually get security patches all the way back for like 90-some weeks. So if you are trying to upgrade maybe once or twice a year, or you have a client who maybe you only have a short amount of time with right away, you might have to maintain this in the future, LTS is probably where you want to be. So in general, the Ember project adheres to semantic versioning. So releases are major, minor, patch. We're pretty familiar with this in general. And major versions are the only ones that can change or remove public APIs after deprecation. So just to illustrate this, so here we've got a timeline of stable releases, so 2.8, 2.9, 2.10, etc. And in each one of these minor versions, so like between 2.8 and 2.9, you can see certain things that get deprecated in your code. So if you're using handlebars safe string or enumerable contains in 2.8, you'll suddenly start to notice deprecation saying, hey, we're actually getting rid of this, or how this works has changed. And we'll talk through how to address all of those things. But all of these things can only be deprecated up to the point of a major version release. So even though we see 5 deprecations here at release points, all of those will continue to work with a warning until 3.0, in which case to upgrade between the latest Ember release and the next major, as long as all of your deprecations have been resolved, then you should be able to just upgrade to the next version and then rinse and repeat with 3.0. And note that this isn't true to form because we don't know when 3.0 is coming out yet. Maybe David does. He doesn't. So basically, oh, go ahead.
From what I've heard, I'm not sure they wanted it to. They may just use ember-cli to strip things out.
So maybe with tree shaking, we won't experience this. But up until now, we've basically had 2 types of major upgrades. And we probably will at some point, just for sanity of the test suite, probably actually remove things eventually. But you kind of have 2 types of upgrades. So you have non-major upgrades. So you're upgrading the minor version, which is the second number, so 2.4 to 2.8. Mostly here with this type of upgrade, you're dealing with deprecation logging and resolving those things over time. And then between major versions, it's like between 2.8 and 3.0, all your deprecations must be resolved because all that code is stripped out from the framework. So upgrading an Ember app is easy. sometimes. But luckily we have first-class tools to help. So the ones that we're going to talk through today are ember-cli, which is sort of the de facto way of building your Ember app. Ember-cli-deprecation-workflow, which is a great add-on to help you work through and resolve your deprecations. And npm check updates, it's actually outside of the Ember community, but it's really helpful to check against your package.json file, see what versions are in there, and see if there are updates. So as part of this, I generated like a really quick Ember app that does form things. It has like some validations. It's using Ember paper for the kind of material design. It's using liquid fire to do this kind of transition. You'll see back and forth. The validations are Ember CP validations. That's Ember CLI Flash that's popping stuff up. So quite a few add-ons, but a pretty simple app. And that's the liquid fire transition that kind of animates that. So even though I built this recently, I built it against 2.4 LTS. I used add-ons that were available when 2.4 came out. So this was originally built with a bunch of old add-ons. And it has acceptance tests for the critical functionality throughout the app. And that's an important part to remember throughout this talk is that deprecations are thrown when that code using the deprecated function is called. So if you don't have any automated code hitting that code path, you won't necessarily know that you're using deprecated code. So having acceptance tests around it that execute at least your sort of critical paths throughout your app is really important to making all the things I'm about to talk about work. So again, liquid fire, Ember paper uses the Ember or the materialized kind of Google styles. Ember font awesome is what showed that little check mark in the box when it was valid. Ember CP validations is what was saying like, hey, that's not a real email address or the password doesn't meet the requirements. And Ember CLI Flash popped up the little flash message at the top. So throughout this talk, we're going to try to get up to the next LTS. So remember, we were on 2.4. We want to get up to the next LTS, which is 2.8. So every fourth release, we have a long-term support version. I'm most used to this kind of upgrade because that's typically what we use at Ibotta, but the same strategies can be used if you want to be on the bleeding edge. You want Glimmer 2, you want kind of the newest, shiniest thing, and you want to be on the release train versus the LTS train. We want to make sure all of our tests are passing, and we'll resolve all of our deprecations as part of this. All right, so how do we do it? The first step is to log all of our current deprecations. So even installing all of this stuff today, I started off with on 2.4 with deprecations. So we'll walk through how to do this. We'll install ember-cli-deprecation-workflow, which is an add-on that helps you to log and figure out exactly what deprecations are used within your app. The nice parts about this, it shuts up your console. If you've never used this before, sometimes you'll like be in development, like traversing around your code, and then suddenly you'll notice that you have like 500 warnings in your console because you've hit so many deprecations. So it says, hey, I know that this deprecation is a thing. I'm going to handle it later. Please don't log about it. And then it also helps you to track down the source of deprecations, which we'll walk through an example of. So you'll notice that even with my very simple app, I already had a deprecation about Ember get owner workflow or polyfill. So what we'll do is we'll call deprecation workflow.flush deprecations, which is part of the Ember CLI deprecation workflow package. Basically what that does is it pays attention to every single deprecation that's thrown within your test suite, and it will log it out so that you can then create this file to silence those things. So what this was doing was rerunning the tests after we saw that, flush the deprecations, wrote it to the file, and now you'll notice that we're not getting this deprecation anymore because of this file that we're creating. So we'll walk through that a little bit more here in just a second. But what you'll notice, especially if you start maybe at a 2.0 app, is you're like, all right, I've got like one deprecation, and then suddenly you'll have more and more and more, and suddenly you're like, how the hell do I have this many deprecations? Like, it's kind of insane. But this is part of the stability without stagnation. The framework is still moving forward. They're allowing you to keep using this sort of older code that they've since deprecated, but they expect you to kind of fix that throughout to make sure that you're compatible moving forward. So this was the file that we generated out of our test suite. So when I did deprecation workflow.flush deprecations, this is literally what I copy and pasted in here. and I put this into config-deprecation-workflow.js. So what this is doing, the part that we really care about is down here. Within the workflow, we're saying silence this message, which is why we don't see it in the console anymore. And there's a match ID that says don't silence all deprecations, but when a developer introduces a deprecation, whether it's within core or within an add-on like this, they actually give it an ID so that Ember deprecation workflow can say, we already know that this is a problem. We're going to fix it at some point, but please don't put this in the console. So now that we've logged all of our current deprecations, we want to get on to upgrading. So step one, you want to read the blog. This is a step that I feel like is not really covered in any of if you Google like how to upgrade an Ember app, but it's one of the most valuable in my opinion. So you start off by reading the blog. The Ember core team does a release blog every time a stable release comes out. So every 6 weeks, if there's a new minor version, there will be a blog post about what happened and what major things changed within this version. This is super, super helpful as you are maybe dealing with some issues as you upgrade. You can know, oh, I remember seeing something about this sort of scenario that I'm running into or whatever. So you can just go to ember.js.com/blog or click blog from the main site. And there's actually a releases tag if you click this guy here. And it will just show you the release blogs. So in our case, we're going from 2.4 to 2.8. So you have a couple blog posts to read 2.4, 5, 6, 7, 8, because you're getting all of those. But there are things like this, which was a big one for a lot of people if you've upgraded past 2.4, is the deprecation of this base URL class. So as we're walking through this, we'll see some stuff where suddenly it's like replacing base URL with root URL, and if you're running through the next steps that we're going to walk through, you're like, what the hell is this? Like, I don't understand what it is. But luckily, the Ember community, they've written an entire blog post about what this is and how to understand how to fix it. So this will be important as we continue on. So we read up on the blog. We kind of know what's going on. So the next thing we'll do is upgrade ember-cli and rerun ember init. So right now you can see we're on 2.4.3. We'll upgrade this to 2.8.0. We'll run npm install, and don't worry, I've sped this up like 150 times. There are lots of speed ups throughout this entire thing. And then we'll run ember init. So what's great about ember init is like this is what runs when you call ember new on an app. It'll walk you through the diffs of every single file that it would generate. So throughout this, it's like, hey, do you want to overwrite this file? And I'm pressing D to see what is the diff between what my file looks like and what you want to replace it with. So in this case, it's like, do you want to update your README? I'm like, nah, that's okay. Okay, the router, that's fine. Bower.json. Well, there's some things in here that I actually care about. So I know I need to upgrade Ember and ember-cli shims, but like Hammer.js and match media, this is a part of my front-end framework, and I don't want it to mess up. So what I'm going to actually do is go in here and manually update the things that Ember is trying to update while leaving everything else in here. So instead of saying, yes, Ember, just overwrite this, I'm going to look at this and see what is different between these and manually update them. So Ember test loader is not in there, but Hammer.js, match media, these are things required by material design. So I'll go fix that file manually, hit no, and then continue on. So in this case, base URL and root URL, kind of know a little bit about this from the blog post. And package.json, this especially if you have an add-on or something, you don't want to overwrite this entire thing because you don't necessarily. We included ember-cli Flash, a bunch of other stuff. So we want to go through here and look at this and actually upgrade the pieces that Ember is trying to upgrade while leaving the things that we care about. So I don't want it to remove ember-cli-deprecation-workflow and ember-cli Flash. I know that I need that as part of my app. So I'm going to go in and look at the diff and kind of manually edit this file so that I'm adding what I need and not removing the things that I've Ember installed in the past. Yeah.
So it doesn't attempt a virginal. It just overwrites the file entirely.
It will overwrite the file entirely. So you have to be careful if you say, it does have like an editor thing where you can jump into the editor. What I just do is I go in here and I actually just update the things that I know are not add-ons that I've installed previously. What's really helpful as part of this, I find, is the git blame actually. So it's helpful to git blame the package.json file and see what did Ember put here and what have I added over time. That's super helpful to see, oh, actually like ember-cli Flash, even as sort of a newer developer to this project, you'd be like, oh, actually, okay, so-and-so added this a few months ago, so I probably shouldn't update this. But yeah, you kind of do have to do some manual work with, especially package.json, the readme, bower.json.
I think the hope is to add an upgrade option at some point, which is, that's not the top priority.
Yeah, just looking at the div, it
Yeah.
sort of
It'd be
applies
lovely
it
to have upgrade, you say upgrade and you're done.
That would be nice. That has not been the case for quite a while. But once you've done this a few times, you can kind of get a feel for these are the add-ons that I'm using, and these are the ones that Ember is adding or removing. And the blogs really help here. So for instance, you'll see it was adding like root URL to a bunch of this stuff. That blog post described exactly why they introduced this handlebars helper. And then it does NPM things, which literally takes minutes. And so you kind of step through piece by piece. The biggest part here to remember is, our machine is rainbow wheeling. The biggest thing here is remembering that if you do overwrite, you potentially are going to have a bad time. So read the blog post first so that you understand what changes are happening. Be mindful of overwriting customizations. And remember that if you Control-C anywhere throughout Ember and init, it's not going to remember anything you've done. So if you're like, yes, overwrite this, don't overwrite this, I need to go like figure out what's going on, Control-C, you're going to lose everything. Any questions about that piece? Yeah?
So if you jump a few versions of CLI, it'll kind of catch you up from every...
It will. Yep. So it'll run, all that's doing basically is saying like, what is different between what would happen if I ran Ember new versus, where you're at now. And before it overwrites anything, it'll just ask you what you want to do with it. All right, so we're on the next LTS, which is great. So it just worked. Like, we're totally fine. No, that unless you have like the simplest Hello World app, which is almost what we have, it's never that easy. But there's some tools that make it really easy to move on from here. But my CI told me that 13 of my acceptance tests suddenly started failing, just upgrading to what Ember told me to upgrade to. Which isn't necessarily what we agreed to, right? It's like, well, nothing will change between minor versions, so I should just be able to bump the version and everything should be fine. So if we read back here, this is kind of what gives us this feeling, right? The Ember project adheres to semantic versioning. Releases are major, minor patch, and only major version releases may change or remove public APIs after deprecation. So your app probably isn't using any private APIs, but your add-ons may or may not. And the failures that were coming up in Travis in my CI environment are kind of weird. Like, I'm seeing some issues with Ember CP validations in there, and it's like cannot find module HTML bars, which was part of the rendering system, and Ember metal streams. Like, it seems really low level what kind of issues we're having here. So this is step 3. So once we read the blog, run Ember CLI, upgrade Ember CLI, run init, now it's all about dependency management. This isn't to call out anybody, so there are a few add-ons that actually broke this specifically. Some of the best, one of the reasons to use Ember is that it has a really strong community, and you can Ember install basically anything and get amazing functionality. Like, the actual code that I wrote to make this actually pretty rich interaction of my sample app is all because of add-ons. So this definitely isn't to call out any add-ons. I love add-ons. But, so we'll walk through how to manage these a little. So the first thing to do is to install this package called npm check updates. This is actually great for any JavaScript project you have that's using npm. All it does is it looks at the versions in your package JSON and it asks npm, is there a newer version of this? So you can get an idea of maybe any dependency that has been upgraded, which probably has resolved any issues you might be having. So we'll run npm check updates within our app. You can also use NCU as an alias, as it kindly tells me. So this runs, and it asks npm about every single package. It's like, okay, Ember CP validations, I remember seeing some kind of issue about that in my tests. So this is another, yeah, so with CP validations, we saw that. We were like, maybe there's something weird going on there. We also noticed that Liquid Fire back here had an upgrade as well. And we noticed that like views and streams were kind of messed up, and Liquid Fire is providing my animation between pages. So it's like, okay, well, you know, I saw HTML bars, which I know is the, if I didn't know or, and I Googled it, I'd find out that this is like, okay, this is a rendering engine. Maybe there's something weird going on with Liquid Fire. So what we'll do is we'll use the npm repo command. And MP4s have been freaking out with Keynote, so I have to hit play a few times. But just do npm repo Liquid Fire. It opens up the repo directly, and you can read about in the README, okay, I should be able to use the latest because I'm on 1.13 or higher, and then going through the changelog and kind of seeing what ended up happening. So I can look at my package.json. All right, I'm on Liquid Fire 0.23. And it seems like 0.27 is the newest. So I can kind of run through this kind of like I did the blog and just scan to see if there's anything obvious that upgrading this might help with. It's like, okay, fixed deprecation, that's kind of cool. I know that I'm not using anything that says it's breaking change like liquid modal. I know I'm not using any modals in my app, so I don't have to worry about this. Liquid outlet, I could grep my code. I know that I'm not using something like this. Bug fix compatibility updates for Ember 2.8. I bet upgrading to 0.25 or higher will fix this. Everything else looks pretty solid. It's housekeeping and bug fixes. Mostly we're just scanning this to see if there are breaking changes that are called out explicitly that might break our app. So that looks good. So now we'll go ahead and update the version of Liquid Fire that we're depending on. So we're on 0.23, 0.27 is the most current. Close it out, run npm install, and then run our test suite again. Hopefully I remember to speed this one up. So now I can run ember-t to run my test suite again. That was just obviously sped up too. Ember build's never that fast. Saying, okay, some other deprecations are a little bit weird. Might be more upgrading to do after this. But I'm running this just to see, has this helped at all? Seeing a bunch of deprecation warnings, but okay, nothing's failing. So upgrading Liquid Fire was the one thing I needed to do to get my test passing. So theoretically, you could deploy now that all of your tests are passing without worrying about it. But we're gonna try to get rid of all the deprecations as well. So when we ran this, we also saw that Ember CP Validations has an upgrade. I'm on 2.93, and 3.15 is the most current. So I'm going to take a look at this repo again. Now notice that it did upgrade a major version. So that probably means that something broke between 2.x and 3.x. So conveniently, there's a changelog in here. Or, let's see, what version was I on again? I was on 2.93. So again, starting from the changelog where I'm at and kind of reading up to see what do I need to do. So there's some new features it looks like, bunch of betas that went through. So fix ember-cli deprecation warning. I was seeing validations throw an error earlier. Keep running through. Looks like there's a bunch of new features and maybe nothing broke between what I needed. But luckily, back here, a lot of times if there are breaking changes, you can look at the upgrading.markdown file and kind of see, okay, upgrading from 2x to 3x, what do I need to do? So you can kind of read through this, read what was deprecated, grep your code for it, see if you're using anything. In most cases, you're probably not using something in here, but you might be. In this case, I was doing something kind of silly that ended up getting deprecated. Or we could also look at npm check updates, semver level minor, which is pretty handy. So it'll say, have there been bug fix releases to 2.x that I can reuse? So it looks like 2.98 has been released too. he didn't include that in his changelog, but like maybe he's just been keeping compatibility and will actually fix stuff on the 2.x branch for a while. So now you kind of run into a choice. Do you want to upgrade? Do you not want to upgrade? Is somebody paying you to do this upgrade, or do you have other feature work you need to do? In my case, there was only one place that I was using some deprecated code. I grepped for it. I found it. It was easy enough to change. Like nobody would have actually used this in real life, but I can run through, fix it like they said in the upgrading guide, and then I can actually go up to the 3.x version. Is anybody using CP validations? It's pretty awesome. If you're using Ember validations, Ember CP validations is something you should definitely check out. Everything's a computed property, so it's very Ember-y, not very observer-y. So now we can run npm install, run our tests again. Oh, this is another point is, so add-ons have this special generator under their own name. So as you're upgrading add-ons, it's good practice to always run ember-g, the name of the add-on I just upgraded. This will basically rerun it as if you've just installed this application. And if there are any additional dependencies that you need, it'll install those for you. In this case, there wasn't, but it's good practice just to run it just in case. So now we should have less deprecations. I took a look at this. Okay, everything else is like ember-cli related. I see there's something with Ember paper that I might be able to do. This is sped up, so don't worry. I know it's getting boring. So Ember paper, check it out. Read the changelog. Same thing. Rinse and repeat with all of your add-ons and see, is there anything that's going to break? Is it worth updating now? Are there any deprecations I'm seeing that are potentially fixed in newer versions? If so, fix them, upgrade them, or just leave them and go fix the deprecations later. So in this case, I ended up upgrading it because I ran through the changelog. I was like, everything's fine. There's nothing crazy about it. So run it again, npm install. Run my tests, see if I have less deprecations. So then everything left when I run npm check updates, everything left is pretty much Ember core. Ember-cli, Ember-cli app version, JSHint, QUnit, release, load initializers. These are all updates within the Ember community. You can always do npm repo if you're not sure to find out. You can also remember from your Ember init, was this something that Ember init was trying to add? But everything left is Ember core, so I'm just going to hang out there. And now when I run, I don't have any deprecations. I can do flush deprecations just to check again, but my workflow file is totally empty. So now we've fixed the getOwner polyfill import by updating Ember CP validations. We saw that in the changelog. So we have no deprecations. Last step, deploy and monitor. So remembering back to the beginning of the talk where I said acceptance tests are really important. Remember that deprecations only come up when you actually exercise that code. So if there are parts of your app that aren't exercised in an automated way, when you call flush deprecations, it doesn't know about every single code path in your app. It only knows about the ones that you added. So it's a good idea to run through this and kind of deploy it in a safe fashion. So ember-cli deploy Redis is a great resource. I'll share out these slides. I did a talk on this last year. It's a great way to release your code and have like a special key that internal folks or QA or whoever can use just to test it out before everybody sees it. So use index keys, keep an eye out for errors, and like ultimately test critical flows. If your app is really driven by registrations, make sure registration works manually. These are great to use to make sure that your app doesn't have random JavaScript errors. So New Relic, Sentry, Track.js, there's a million products that basically do the same thing. This will, as your production users are running into errors, it'll log those and you can check them out and see, is this related to my upgrade or not? So ongoing maintenance, make sure you pay attention to deprecations. As you saw with that previous slide, it can get out of control really quickly if you don't pay attention to them. Remembering that you don't have to fix all deprecations when you're upgrading minor versions, and you can use that deprecation workflow file as a log. So in almost all of my real projects, that deprecation workflow file, like we saw, is just a regular JavaScript file. So you can say, above the getOwner polyfill import, you can say, I think this is caused by such and such an add-on. I should look at this. Here's, a Jira story or Pivotal Tracker or whatever you use. Here's a story that says we should look at this at some point. And then when you're ready to actually fix these things, you can use the throw handler. So right now, our workflow, the handler is saying silence. So we're silencing this particular error. Well, if we change this handler to throw and run our test suite, it'll actually throw an exception every time that deprecation is hit. So you can actually try to figure out where it's coming from. So it logs the stack trace. You can take a look at the stack trace, see if you can figure out where it's from. This is super handy. So, okay, this is throwing an exception. I can scroll up through this file, seeing some stuff about validations. Okay, define ember-cp validations validator base. Something in ember-cp validations is throwing this deprecation. I can go back in, take a look at the change log, or even search for that deprecation within their pull requests. Okay, now I know it's, it was caused by a particular issue that has since been fixed. So I typed in safe string, which came up as part of the deprecation. You can click on it. Okay, cool. They fixed it in 2.x. Ophir released something for this, and I can upgrade to that version, get rid of that issue. Yes, so this is the deprecation workflow file. So all of this stuff that I've been talking about in here is all on the README of the Ember-CLI deprecation workflow gem, or add-on rather. You can tell I've been working in Ruby a lot lately. I haven't been doing much Ember lately. But yeah, so basically when we ran our test suite, you call flush deprecations on the window within the test suite, and it generates this file for you. And within their documentation, it says that the handler has 3 different possibilities: silence, warn, which is the default if we didn't have this file at all, or throw. So when I change it into throw, instead of just logging it or not outputting it at all, it'll actually throw, fail our tests that are actually hitting that, but it also gives us valuable stack trace information to say, okay, I can start to splunk through the code a little bit and see where it's coming from. Sometimes it might be in your own app as well. So that's about it. Does anybody have any questions about stuff we went through? I'm going to share these slides. That app that we ran through has a repository, and each PR is like each step of the process, so you can walk through it, see each point in the process and kind of follow through. There's a link to NPM check updates, Ember-CLI deprecation workflow, my website where I'll post some of this stuff. But here on the Ember-CLI deprecation workflow page, this is where it tells you about all of these handlers that we were using and how to flush the deprecations to screen. Like pretty much everything I talked about is all within here, so you don't have to remember all of it. Go to this page, it'll help you through it.